Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to be covering F.Port. Now I'm going to be showing you quite a lot on how to set this up and go into great detail. However, this video might be long. I don't know how long just yet, but I will have the table of contents linked down below and will also be available in the video progress bar so you can skip to whatever part you want to know about. So some of the things we're going to be covering in this video before we get into it is the advantages of F.Port. Also the difference, I even measured the difference on an oscilloscope between S-Bus and F.Port. Haven't done the full latency yet, that'll be upcoming later on, but I can show you the difference in the size and how long it takes for each packet to be sent. We'll cover that slightly in this video. And then after that, we're going to jump into how to prepare your receiver so it'll be able to run F.Port, and then do the setup guide for an F4 or whether it's an F7, because there's two different setups for this. And there's a lot of things you need to take into consideration when you're setting it up, depending on your flight controller, whether it's an F4 or an F7. But I will be covering this in great detail and as fast as possible with no extra gibberish left and right. So it's going to be full packed with information, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. So let's get started. All right, so in this section, we're going to be discussing the advantages of F.Port. Now, F.Port is basically S-Bus and S.Port connected together. Now, if you didn't know what S-Bus is, it's the protocol we use to control our quadcopters in the air if you're using FrSky. Now, S.Port was added, which allows telemetry data to go back and forth. So you'll be able to get telemetry in. You could do some Lua scripts to change settings in the BetaFlight, but you needed 2 wires. And now in F.Port, you only need 1 wire. So it combines both of those together and it makes it faster, or the data rate faster. So the speed of which it transfers data is 2 milliseconds faster per packet. We'll explain what that means. This has nothing to do with latency, but the latency is also better. But we'll get into a little bit more detail in a bit here. So again, 1 wire telemetry, both way telemetry with F.Port with 1 wire, Lua script, so we'll be able to change the Betaflight PIDs, rates, filters, your VTX channel. You can do all kinds of crazy cool things, especially with the Lua scripts. And it's basically future-proof right now because this is the latest, most modern protocol that FrSky is currently using. And it's available on both their 900 megahertz system and also their normal XSR radios, you know, like the RXSR and everything of that nature. Now, I have this picture here that I took on oscilloscope about 2 hours ago here when I was testing. So here what we see is we see both signals actually. The top one up here is F.Port signal. The bottom one is S-Bus. Now we're not going to too far detail here, but I just want to show you 1 packet of data of F.Port right here takes 7 milliseconds. And 1 packet on S-Bus takes 9 milliseconds. Now this has nothing to do with latency because I'll explain how latency works in a bit here. So we are 3 milliseconds faster in the rate that we transfer data. So we'll be able to send more data in less amount of time. That's really great. And the latency, we'll come back to that later. This will also help latency as well. But as you can tell, we're transferring much more information in even faster time than S-Bus. And again, we're using a 2-way transfer. So we're actually writing and reading, which is really great here. So that's just a quick look at the differences between them. So now let's go ahead and discuss how we're going to go about preparing our receiver for F.Port. You don't just click a button and it turns into F.Port. You do need to flash your receiver with the F.Port firmware, which is what we are going to be covering next. So the first thing we do before we actually start downloading our firmware, because there's going to be 2 types of firmware. There's going to be the Access and then the ACCST firmware. Now you need to know what transmitter or what firmware you're currently on. For example, if your transmitter has the word Access, that means we're going to download the Access version, which is going to be better. And another way to know this is when you go into your bind section here. Now, once we scroll down to the internal RF, we want to check the mode. So this will also help you know which software you're actually running. Now, more than likely, if your transmitter has the word Access, not ACCST, Access, then you're going to download the Access version. But here, you could also double check that with looking at the mode. So if you have ACCST D16 and Access and nothing else, then you're going to want to download the Access version. Now, if you have D8 and D16, but you don't have the Access, then you're going to want to download the ACCST version, which I'll show you on the page now. So now the next step is downloading the firmware for the receivers. Now there's again two types of receivers. We have the ACC-ST and also the Access. So let's go ahead and look for those. So I'll have the link to this page down below. It's the FrSky download page. Now you're going to want to scroll down. You go into receivers. Now I can't find my receiver here, so I just click load more. Allow that to load. Now my receiver is the RXSR. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And you're greeted with this page right here. So the next thing we want to go to is the Access firmware here. Now, as you could read, this is the Access firmware. So if you're running the ACC-ST, you're going to want to download this one down here. Now I'm going to download both of them just for the sake of this tutorial. So you want to get the latest one, which is the top one. So here's the first firmware. If you're rocking Access, this is the one you would download. And if you're rocking the ACC-ST, this is the one you want to download here. And now let's go ahead and put those into a folder. However, if you are running the Access firmware, you're going to need to download one more thing, which is the firmware for the internal module of your transmitter. And the way we find that is we go back to the download section. Now, again, this is only if you're running Access. If you're not running Access, you don't need this. So you need to find your transmitter. Mine's the Tyrannus X9 Lite. And once we go here, we want to go to firmware, which is the second one, and download the ISRM. Because what happens is, what happened to me right now is I downloaded the Access version for my receiver, and it wouldn't bind. It's because my transmitter also needed an update as well, and this is where you get it, and I'll show you how to do that as well if you're running the Access. And you just click download here. So once everything is downloaded, you need to uncompress them, which means just unzip them. They come in zip files here. So let's take a look at the Access firmware here. So we're just going to open this one. So this is if you're rocking Access. You see we have two firmwares. We have just the normal. This would be the normal S-Bus firmware that you'd use, and this is the F.Port. This is the one that we will be needing in order to get F.Port enabled here. So it'll stop using S-Bus and it'll only use F.Port from now on. And if we go back to the normal ACC-ST firmwares, we see we have 4 files here. Now the FCC is if you're in the US, and the LBT is if you're in Europe. And as you can tell, we have 2 of each. Again, FCC here is F.Port. So if you're in the US and your transmitter is an FCC transmitter, then you're going to want to use the F.Port FCC. If you're in Europe, then the F.Port LBT firmware. This is what we're going to take down to our transmitter here. Okay, so what is the next step now? Well, what we need to do is we need to take the SD card out of our transmitter and plug it into the PC somehow. So here's my SD card right here plugged in that came out of my transmitter. And you want to go to the firmware folder, and as you can tell, it's empty. Yours might not be empty, and you need to take the appropriate firmware. So for mine, since I'm using Access, I'm going to go to the Access, and I'm going to take the Access F.Port here. Now, if you are using just the ACC-ST, then you're going to want to go ahead and grab whether your Europe F.Port or the US F.Port right here, and just drop that like I did there. Next, what we need to do, if you're on the Access firmware, is grab the ISRM right here. Since I am on Access, I'm going to grab this as well and just stick it into the firmware folder just like that. Next thing we want to do is just basically remove the SD card, and we're going to go ahead and plug it back into the transmitter itself. Now you will need an SD card in order to do this here. So there we go. So make sure it's off, and now I have the SD card plugged in, and let's go ahead and take a look at what's going to be the next step. All right, so now once we grab our receiver here, we need to figure out which is ground, 5-volt, and S-Port as well. S-Port is very important because that's how we will flash these receivers here. So if we take a closer look at the instruction manual of my receiver, we see ground, 5-volt, and S-Port. So keep that in mind. Here they are. And now let's see how we're going to connect this to our transmitter. So here's our receiver, just like the picture. We have ground, 5-volt, and this is going to be our S-Port here. Now you will need a servo type connector like this here. Now always make sure the red one's in the middle, and the ground and the other one just on the sides. It doesn't matter because you could flip it here. And I'll explain how this actually connects into your transmitter because there isn't really much documentation that actually shows you that or tells you that here. So we're going to go ahead and grab our signal, which is going to be the yellow one since this is basically black and ground. And we're going to connect it to our S-Bus right here, or S-Port, sorry. We're going to connect it to our S-Port here. So there we go. I'm just going to do it like this. And next I'm going to grab my 5V, and I'm just going to connect those together. Now, once you have these set up, just be careful for them not to touch once you plug everything in, because then it could be pretty bad actually. And then now we have ground here. So here's ground. Okay, and now your setup should look something like this. We have the signal onto one of the edges here, the ground to the other edge, and the 5V in the middle. So that's very important here. The 5V should be in the middle of this connector here. So the next thing we want to do is figure out which one's our Fport, which is the white wire, which is going to the yellow wire here. So the yellow wire is our Fport, and we need to grab our controller. Depending on what type of controller you have, the location of this is going to be slightly different. But what we need to take a closer look at is that little notch off to the right here. So what that means is that's where your Fport should be connected. So if we bring in our connector here and plug that right there, we see that the yellow wire was the Fport, so that's where it should be, 5V in the middle, and then ground should be on the left. Yours might be flipped the other way, but just take a look at the notch and make sure it lines up right there. And now we have this connected. Now make sure, if you're doing it like me, not to have any of the wires touch, or else it's not really a nightmare. It's happened to me twice, but you could brick it. So just be very, very careful with that. So the next thing we want to do while this is all connected into place is the SD card with the firmware is actually installed into the transmitter itself here. Now we want to go ahead and power on the transmitter. And the next thing you want to do is you want to hold the menu button and you want to enter the radio setup here. So once you enter the radio setup, then you want to go to page, and then we're going to want to scroll down to firmware. So here's firmware. There we go. And here we have, since we're using access, we have two firmwares, like I told you, the ISRM and the receiver's firmware as well. Now, again, if you're ACC-ST, then you'll only have one here. So let's go ahead and flash the receiver here like you would do on ACC-ST as well. So you want to go here to the firmware, you want to hold on it, and you want to say flash Fport. Now, if you're using the ACC-ST, it's going to give you more options: flash internal, flash external, and flash Fport. You want to just click on flash Fport in both cases, this one and also the ACC-ST. And once we set that up, just don't touch it. Make sure the wires weren't touching each other, and just let that write. It's going to take some time. Make sure you do not stop this at any moment. So once flashing is successful, you should get this message right here, and it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to flash, so don't worry. Make sure you have enough battery in your transmitter when doing that. Now we click OK. Now if you're using the ACC-ST, you're finished, but if you are using the access, you're going to want to install the ISRM here. Now we're going to hold it, and as you can tell, we have the flash Fport, flash internal, and flash external. Now for the ISRM software, which is meant for the transmitter, then you're going to want to say flash internal module. So you just click that and just let it flash and reboot. So I don't need to flash it because I've already flashed it, and I don't need to do that. So I'm just going to exit now. So like this, our receivers are basically completely ready to be installed into our flight controller, which is the next step on this video. So now we're going to be covering the F4 connection setup. Now, if you have an F7, check the video progress bar and jump to the F7 connection setup. So since we're rocking an F4, there's a problem with the inversion. However, if you're using an RXSR like I am here, you have a pad for Fport that is not inverted, which is that one right there. There's two of them next to each other, and it's the upper one. There's two right there, and it's that top one. It's not this bottom one. So yeah, that's where you're going to want to run this wire from. That's how you're going to connect it to your flight controller. You're going to ignore the normal Fport pad here, which is, this is going to be used for the F7, by the way, and this is going to be used for the F4. So I highly recommend you get an RXSR like I have here. And then we have our 5V and ground. So let's go ahead and set this up. So now for the F4, the uninverted wire for Fport is going to go on a T pad, not an R pad like usual, that's one of its differences here. So we're going to have to find an open T pad. So now we need to find an open T pad. So here's T6. I'm going to use T6 here, and you need to make sure that the R6 is not being used. For example, if we use the T4, you need to also make sure your R4 is not used. So here we have a T6, so the R6 is not being used. So I'm going to go ahead and install that right there. And if you installed the normal F.Port pad or wire on here, then it's not going to work. You're going to have to find the uninverted variant of the F.Port like I have here on the RXSR. Okay, so now I've installed my inverted F.Port to a T6 and I gave it 5 volt in ground. Next, we're going to have to jump into Betaflight. But obviously, before Betaflight, you need to make sure you bind your receiver. So make sure you bind your receiver and then we start doing the Betaflight. So I'm going to quickly bind my receiver off camera and then we're going to go ahead and jump into the Betaflight configuration. And this is also different from the F7 as well. All right, so now once your receiver has been installed, you need to make sure of 2 things before continuing on. 1 is that your flight controller is plugged into Betaflight. 2, your receiver is on and it is bound. Those are the most important things to do before continuing on with this step. So once we connect into Betaflight, what we need to do is we need to go to the ports tab here. And remember how we set ours up on T6? So we need to find the UART6. Now, if we set it up on T3, then we need to find UART3. So here's UART6, which is going to be T6. And you need to make sure everything is disabled like this: disabled auto, disabled auto, disabled auto, and make sure the serial RX is on just for one UART. So, and it's going to be the UART for your receiver. So we have that set up. Next you need to do is make sure you save and reboot. So we save and reboot. Sometimes it connects back, sometimes it doesn't. Just press connect again. Next we need to go to the configurations tab and we need to scroll down here and we need to find receiver, the first one, serial based receiver. Choose it and then you could open this down and you'll find FrSky Fport. If you don't find FrSky Fport, then you need to update your flight controller. So keep that in mind as well. Once that's set up, we need to save and reboot as well. And then we need to install a CLI command. This is very important here. So you could actually work, because if you don't, it just won't work. So the commands for an F4 flight controller are these right here. I'll have them down below so you could just copy and paste them right in. These right here. And for the F7, which we'll cover next, is going to be these right here. So we're going to go ahead and just press copy like that. And then we could go ahead and put paste. And it just shows save right now, but if we press the arrow key up, we can see the other commands as well. And we just press enter, boom, and it should reboot. It has to reboot because that's what the save does. It just saves and reboot, and then we click connect, and now we can go into our receiver and see if it's actually working. And that's how you'd set up F.Port. Lua Scripts is going to be in the next video, not this video, which I'll show you how to take advantage of F.Port as well. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into the F7 setup. All right, so now we're going to be discussing how to set up the wires on an F7 flight controller. It's going to be different than an F4, but it's basically the same concept. Now, currently this is an F4, but just ignore that. Let's pretend it's an F7. So what you want to do is you want to find your F.Port wire, which is going to be on my receiver, this white one here. Now, the reason why I have this blue one here is for the uninverted, which was for the F4. So if you missed that, you can go back and check what that was. So if you're rocking the F7, you're going to want to take your S-port signal, not the S-bus, the S-port, because that's the new F-port. You're going to take that wire and you're going to connect it to any available T-pad. So for example, here we found a T6 right here. And when you find, for example, a T6, you want to make sure the R6 is not connected to anything. And let's just say you had a T4, make sure the R4 is not connected to anything, and then connect your S-port to, or your F-port to that T-pad. So on this flight controller, even though it's an F4, we're going to be using the T6 pad right here. So the S-port goes to a T-pad, so the T6. Now once that's set up, then we're going to want to go ahead and jump into Betaflight. So now before you log into Betaflight, you need to make sure of a couple things. One, your flight controller is connected to the PC. Also, your receiver has been booted, or it's on, and it's also bound, and your transmitter is on as well. So we could confirm that everything is working. Once you double check all of those, then we can go ahead and click connect. Now what we want to do is we want to go to the ports tab, and remember how we set ours on TX6? So we're going to find the corresponding number, which is UART6. Now, if it was a T4, then it would be UART4. So ours is the UART6, which was T6. Next, you want to make sure everything is disabled just like this, disabled, and only the serial RX is on for that UART. So again, we're on T6, so serial RX. Once you do that, then save and reboot. And it's very important to save and reboot. Next, we want to go ahead and click connect again. Sometimes it connects, sometimes it doesn't. Then we want to go to the configurations tab. Now, once we go to the configurations tab, we need to find the receiver section and make sure you click serial based receivers here. And once you do that, you have another second drop down box available for you where you'll find the FrSky Fport. Now, if you don't find the FrSky Fport, then you need to update your flight controller to a later firmware. And once we set that up like that, serial based receiver, FrSky Fport, save and reboot. We're not done. So the next thing we need to do is we actually need to go into the CLI tab right here. And I'll have this down below for F7 flight controllers. This is what you need to do. So you just copy this right here, and we're just going to go ahead and paste it down here. And you might just see the word save, so don't worry. If you press the arrow key up, you can see the other commands here. So they're all in there right now, but it's just showing one line at a time. Once you have those pasted, just press enter, and it should just exit out like that. So it just saves and reboot, and then you can go back to your receiver section and see if everything is working or not. And everything seems to be working, and that means we're good. So that's it. That's how F.Port is set up. Now I'm going to quickly just jump into some of the Lua scripts I have, or just actually one right now, which is for Betaflight, just to show you how useful this is going to be in the future. And you can do all kinds of other crazy cool stuff, which I'll cover in a separate video for Lua scripts and everything of that nature. So now let's just say everything is set up like we did, and you also download the Betaflight script. Now I'll cover that in a later video, and I just want to quickly show you the amount of things you can do and some problems you might run into. So the first thing I recommend after you do the F.Port setup is you go into your normal menu where it says model select, and just keep going down the pages until we get into the telemetry section. So it's really good to delete all your sensors first. Then once you're in the telemetry section, you want to scroll down depending on how far yours goes, and just say delete all sensors and press enter here. So obviously make sure your receiver is on and your flight control and everything is on. So once we delete all the receivers, just go ahead and say discover new sensors, and just let that just run for a quick second or two. The reason why I do this is because what I've noticed is when you first flash everything and set everything up, the Betaflight scripts won't work and you won't get the data from the flight controller. So you just have to do this. I guess it just refreshes the sensors here. So we just exit out of that. Now when you install the Betaflight script, again, I'll show you the Lua scripts in a later video. What we want to do is we want to go here. Here's my Betaflight scripts. So there we go. And we could just say, hold it, execute. And now it's actually giving me the exact PID and just about everything from the flight control. It's going and reading this stuff and bringing it back to me. So we could change quite a lot. So we have just our normal PIDs. We also have our feed forwards, and it just got these values. So you give it a second to get the values. Our RC rate, super rate, and also our RC expo. And what else do we have? We have so many other things, which I'll just quickly go through. And you can do this for a lot of other things as well, like your video transmitter. Also, I don't think I have that Lua scripts on here yet, but I'll do that in a separate video where I cover all of those Lua scripts. So you can do quite a lot with this. Here, you'll be able to change the VTX channel as well and turn on and off pit mode. And this is some other stuff as well here. And now this is, I think, different than the other one. This is a slightly different PID, the GPS PIDs, I guess. And this is back to the original PIDs here. So overall, it's really useful, and we're going to be testing its latency in a later video and also covering the Lua scripts in a later video as well. So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and also that like, and come join my Patreon. I do a ton of giveaways per month. You can go ahead and just check it out and see the type of giveaways I do. New Patreons, like if you're new this month, there's like last month there was 2 new people, and there's a giveaway, just a separate premium giveaway between the new people of the month. So you have a high probability of winning something. You also support the channel, and you get other perks as well if you go ahead and check out the Patreon. And again, everything is linked down below. Go ahead and check those out. Those greatly support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.